Hello everyone, my name is the Storyteller, and today I will share with you some horror stories to help you fall asleep. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. But before that, write down in the comments where you are listening this and what time it is. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss upcoming horror stories. The Boy Behind the Smile. Chapter 1: The Perfect Kid. Crestwood was the kind of small town where everyone knew each other's business, or thought they did. Kids biked home before sunset. The old church bell rang every hour, and the police rarely had anything more serious to handle than a noise complaint or a runaway dog. And in that quiet, familiar town lived Ethan Cole, a 17-year-old who everyone thought was perfect. He was polite, helped neighbors shovel snow, tutored kids after school, and never once got detention. Teachers loved him. Parents trusted him. Girls liked him. But there was something about Ethan's smile that lingered too long, something in his eyes that didn't quite match the warmth in his voice. At night, in the attic of his family's old house, Ethan kept a locked trunk. No one ever asked what was inside, and no one dared to go near it. The attic smelled faintly of bleach and rust, a scent his mother once noticed but dismissed. Ethan had a ritual. After finishing his homework, he would climb the creaking stairs, open the trunk, and take out one of his trophies, a bracelet, a hair tie, sometimes a small photograph. He'd sit in the dark, touching each item like it was holy. He wasn't always like this, but something had changed last summer, something that had awakened the part of him that didn't feel guilt anymore. It started with a sound in the woods. Chapter 2: The First Time. It was the middle of July when Ethan and his friends went camping by the river. They were celebrating the end of junior year. A few beers, a cheap Bluetooth speaker, and the kind of teenage chaos that always felt invincible. But when night fell and the others passed out, Ethan stayed awake. The forest felt alive in a way that made his skin prickle. Every sound was sharp: the crackle of a branch, the distant hoot of an owl, the rush of the river. Then came the whisper. It wasn't human. It slid through the trees, soft and cruel, almost like it was speaking directly into his head. Do it. You'll never feel alive until you do. He turned, his flashlight cutting through the dark, but there was no one there. Just shadows and the reflection of his own eyes in the beam. The next morning, he found a dead raccoon near the edge of the water, throat slashed open, eyes staring upward. None of his friends noticed, but Ethan couldn't look away. He crouched beside it and felt something in his chest that wasn't fear. It was fascination. That night, when everyone else fell asleep again, he found a knife in his camping bag. He didn't remember packing it, but when he held it, the whisper came again. Do it. And somewhere deep in the woods, something changed inside Ethan Cole forever. Chapter 3: The Second Life. By fall, Ethan had learned to hide it well. He still smiled at teachers, still kissed his mother's cheek before school, still aced every exam. But inside, he was someone else. He began walking home through the forest instead of the main road. He said it helped him clear his head. In truth, it was practice, learning which paths were quietest, which spots were far from view. Then came Ashley, a freshman who looked up to him like an older brother. She asked him for help with math one afternoon, and he agreed. She trusted him immediately. That evening, they stayed late at the library until closing. Ashley called her parents to say Ethan would walk her home. He did. But when they passed through the shortcut in the woods, the same one where he'd heard the whisper, Ethan stopped walking. He listened to the wind, to the heartbeat in his chest. The voice returned, fainter this time, almost teasing. Prove it wasn't luck. He didn't remember every second. Just flashes: her frightened voice, his trembling hands, the sound of metal scraping against bone, and then silence. When it was done, he stood there for a long time, staring down at what he'd done. He expected guilt, panic, horror, but felt none of it, just stillness. Before he left, he took her bracelet. And when he returned home, He hid it in the attic trunk. Chapter 4: The Mask. 2 weeks later, Crestwood was buzzing with fear. Ashley's disappearance was on every news station. Her picture hung from lampposts, and students whispered in the hallways. Ethan watched it all quietly. He joined the search party, even comforted Ashley's mother, tears glistening perfectly in his eyes. He said all the right things, his voice calm and gentle. Inside, he was thrilled by how easily they believed him. At school, people began to look at him differently with admiration. "He's such a good kid," they said. "He really cares." He liked that. It made him invisible. But the whispers didn't stop. They came every night now, especially when he was alone. Sometimes they spoke with many voices, laughing, mocking, daring him. "You're not finished. One isn't enough." Ethan began to draw strange things in his notebooks: eyes, knives, shapes he didn't understand. His grades stayed perfect, but his thoughts grew darker. He found himself watching people differently, studying how they moved, how they breathed, especially those who annoyed him, a teacher who embarrassed him in front of the class, a jock who shoved him in the hallway. He wondered how they'd look if they stopped breathing. And each night, the attic trunk grew heavier. Chapter 5: The Hunter. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed Crestwood, muffling every sound, making the world seem smaller. Ethan had developed habits, routines that fed the thing inside him. He'd take long walks in the dark, pretending to listen to music but really just watching. He memorized who left their houses late, who walked alone. He began carrying the knife again. His next victim wasn't random. It was Mr. Dunley, the shop teacher. The man had once slapped Ethan's shoulder and called him soft. He'd laughed about it with other students. Ethan never forgot. One night, Ethan waited behind the school parking lot. Mr. Dunley was locking up, humming to himself. The snow fell thick, and no one else was around. It happened quickly, a blur of movement, a gasp, the crunch of snow turning red. The sound of the man choking on his last breath filled the air before vanishing into silence. Ethan dragged the body behind the dumpster and walked home, snow hiding every footprint. When he returned to his attic, he opened the trunk and smiled. The whisper was gone for the first time in months, replaced by something else, something he hadn't felt before. Peace. Chapter 6: The Missing Pieces. By January, Crestwood was a town on edge. Ashley was still missing, and now Mr. Dunley's absence had the police working around the clock. The schools were locked after dark, curfews enforced, parents paranoid. But Ethan, he thrived in the fear. He walked through the halls, calm and collected, watching the chaos around him like a spectator at a show he'd written himself. Detectives came to the school one afternoon. They interviewed students, asked questions, took notes. Ethan volunteered to help them organize the search. His composure impressed them. "You're a good kid," one officer said. "Your parents raised you right." Ethan smiled. "I try my best." But at home, his mind was unraveling. He began to hear the whisper again, faint, buried under static. It wasn't the same as before. It wasn't pushing him to kill. It was laughing, mocking. "You think you're in control. You're just what it made you." Some nights he'd wake up covered in sweat, hands trembling, unsure if he'd been dreaming or remembering. He'd rush to the attic to make sure the trunk was still locked. He'd touch the cold metal and whisper to it, "Don't leave me." Inside were his trophies, reminders that it was all real, that he wasn't just some scared boy losing his mind. But sometimes in the dark, he thought he saw them move. Chapter 7: The Investigation. Detective Marion Keller had seen monsters before, but none of them hid behind smiles this convincing. She'd been called to Crestwood after the second disappearance. To her, it didn't look like coincidence. The same pattern, a quiet night, no witnesses, no evidence, just gone. Keller had a theory. The killer was local, smart, someone who blended in. When she first met Ethan, she didn't suspect him, not really. He looked too young, too innocent. But there was something about his eyes when she mentioned the word murder. They didn't flinch. That night she wrote his name down, just in case. Meanwhile, Ethan could feel her watching him. He saw the way she paused when he spoke, how her gaze lingered. It made him excited. Someone had finally noticed. He began playing a new game, leaving little hints, subtle ones. A button near the riverbank, a footprint half buried in snow, just enough to keep her guessing. He wanted her to chase him. The whisper returned louder that night, gleeful. "She'll never catch you. You were born for this." Ethan smiled into the mirror, eyes cold. For the first time, he whispered back, "I know." Chapter 8, Cracks in the Glass. On the outside, Ethan's life looked perfect. He got into honors programs. Teachers praised him. The principal wrote him a recommendation letter. But on the inside, everything was rotting. He started seeing things, flashes of faces and reflections, smears of red on his hands that vanished when he blinked. He'd hear Ashley's voice calling from the woods, begging him to stop. At dinner, he barely spoke. His mother noticed. "You're pale, honey," she said one night. "Are you feeling okay?" Ethan forced a smile, just tired. But that night, he crept into the attic again and opened the trunk. The air was thick and metallic. He counted the trophies, every one of them, and froze. One was missing. He tore through the trunk, breathing hard, muttering under his breath. Then he heard it, a faint creak behind him. The attic door. He spun around, but no one was there. Just the whisper again, so close it felt like breath against his ear. "You're losing control, Ethan." He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, whispering to himself over and over, "It's mine, it's mine, it's mine." Downstairs, his mother stirred in her sleep, unaware that her perfect son was slowly breaking apart above her. Chapter 9, The Copycat. A week later, another body was found, this time a teenage boy. But something was wrong. The police report described the wounds, the method, even the cleanup, and it was all wrong. Too messy, too desperate, too loud. Ethan realized someone was copying him. At first, he was furious. The thought of someone ruining his work disgusted him. But then, a new idea crept in. What if he could use this? He could make them take the blame. He began to follow the story, watching how the town reacted. Detective Keller now believed there might be more than one killer. That gave Ethan a thrill of satisfaction. He even found the copycat once, a boy from a nearby town, obsessed with the case, trying to imitate the mystery. Ethan met him online, pretending to be just another true crime enthusiast. They talked for days. And one night, Ethan invited him to meet in person. When the boys showed up at the old quarry, Ethan was waiting in the dark. "You shouldn't pretend to be something you're not," Ethan said softly. The next morning, the copycat's car was found abandoned. Inside was a note, a confession for all the murders. Detective Keller read it and frowned. "Too perfect," she whispered. Ethan watched the news and smiled. Chapter 10, The Night of Snow. By February, the town had gone quiet again. Too quiet. The snow never stopped. Streets were empty, stores closed early, and everyone prayed the nightmare was finally over. Ethan almost believed it himself. But that night he woke to a sound outside his window, faint footsteps crunching through snow. He got up and looked out. Someone was standing in the yard, a figure still as stone, head tilted upward, watching his window. Ethan's pulse quickened. He couldn't see their face, just a shape pale against the dark. He blinked once, twice, and the figure was gone. The whisper came back, louder than ever. "They know what you are. They're coming for you." Ethan stumbled back, hands trembling, staring at his own reflection. For the first time, he saw what Keller must have seen, the cold, hollow thing staring back. He turned away, whispering, "No, I'm still me." But even as he said it, He could hear laughter, soft, cruel, and coming from the attic. Chapter 11: The Visitors. The police came to Ethan's house the next morning. His mother stood at the door in her robe, hair a mess, her hands shaking slightly when she saw the badges. Detective Keller smiled politely. "Just a few questions, Mrs. Cole." Ethan appeared behind her, calm as ever, a mug of coffee in his hand. "Of course, Detective, come in." The living room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Everything in the house was spotless, as if he'd been preparing for this. Keller noticed the precision, the order, too much of it. "Do you know a boy named Ryan Hale?" she asked. Ethan blinked once slowly. "The one who confessed?" "That's right. He mentioned you in his messages." Ethan smiled faintly. "Oh, I just talked to him online about the case. I didn't know him." Keller nodded but kept her gaze locked on him. "Did you ever meet him?" A pause too long. "No," Ethan said, his voice calm, steady. She knew he was lying. She just didn't know how to prove it. When they left, Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, heart hammering. His smile broke for the first time in months. He went to the attic that night, opened the trunk and whispered, "They're getting too close." The whisper answered, "Then you know what must come next." Chapter 12: The Fire in the Woods. Ethan knew the police would search soon. So he made a plan. That night, long after midnight, he dragged the heavy trunk down the stairs, each creak of the wood echoing like a scream. He covered it in blankets, carried it outside, and disappeared into the forest. The snow was deep, the cold biting at his skin, but he didn't feel it. He found a clearing, the same one where Ashley had died, and began to dig. When the hole was deep enough, he threw the trophies inside. The bracelet, the knife, the trinkets, everything that proved what he'd done. Then he poured gasoline and lit the match. The flames burst upward, devouring the evidence. Ethan watched it burn with something close to grief, as though he was watching part of himself die. But the whisper didn't let him mourn. "You think you can bury it? You are it." The fire grew, catching the trees, spreading fast. Ethan dropped the gas can and ran, smoke filling his lungs. Behind him, the woods burned, an inferno swallowing every secret he'd ever kept. By the time firefighters arrived, Ethan was home again, pretending to sleep. But as the orange glow flickered across his ceiling, he smiled in the dark. Chapter 13: The Girl in the Mirror. After the fire, Ethan began seeing Ashley everywhere. At first, it was just flashes, in reflections, in crowds, in dreams. Then one night, he woke to find her standing at the foot of his bed, pale and silent, her throat marked by the wound he'd given her. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. Ethan whispered, "You're not real." But her lips parted, and in a voice that sounded like static, she said, "You can't hide forever." He woke screaming, drenched in sweat. His mother ran into the room, terrified. "Ethan, what's wrong?" He stared at her blankly, chest heaving. Nightmare. But when she left, he saw it again, her reflection in the mirror, smiling faintly, the way she used to in class. That morning, Ethan couldn't look anyone in the eye. Every face reminded him of someone he'd taken, and every shadow seemed to whisper his name. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. He began skipping classes, wandering the woods during the day, searching the ashes of the burned clearing like an addict looking for a fix. Some nights, he thought he could still smell the blood in the snow. Chapter 14: The Confession Tape. Detective Keller wasn't sleeping either. After weeks of dead ends, she got a call from a tech unit. They recovered a partial file from Ryan Hale's laptop. The data was corrupted, but a small video survived. When she pressed play, the screen flickered, and Ryan appeared scared, twitchy, looking off camera. "He told me to do it," Ryan said. "He said it would make me free, said I'd feel alive." Keller's pulse quickened. The camera panned slightly, showing a glimpse of someone standing behind Ryan. Just a shoulder, a bit of blonde hair, and a voice. Calm, quiet. Go on, tell them the truth. Keller froze. She recognized that voice. Ethan Cole. She watched the clip over and over, each time more certain. The perfect boy from Crestwood High was the monster she'd been chasing. That night she gathered her team. We bring him in tomorrow morning, she said. Alive if we can. Chapter 15, The Storm. The blizzard hit just before dawn. Power lines fell, roads closed, and the town was swallowed by white. Ethan woke before sunrise. He didn't know why, just a pulse of dread in his chest. He looked outside and saw flashing lights in the distance, faint but moving closer. The whisper in his head was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. They're coming, you know what to do. He went to the attic one last time. The trunk was gone, just ashes where it used to be. He stood in the middle of the floor, shaking, whispering, I don't want to do this anymore. The voice hissed, Then let me do it for you. Ethan blacked out. When he woke, he was standing in his kitchen, barefoot, a knife in his hand. The front door was open. Snow was blowing in. And somewhere downstairs, his mother was calling his name. Chapter 16, The Knock at the Door. The sound came again, bang, 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 sharp against the storm's howling wind. Police opened the door. Ethan froze in the middle of the kitchen. His mother appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. What's going on? She whispered. He couldn't answer. The world felt muffled, far away. The knife in his hand was slick from the melting snow. Ethan, his mother said softly, her voice shaking. What are you holding? He looked down. For a second he didn't remember. Then he saw the blade, red from where he'd gripped it too tight. Another knock, louder this time. He dropped the knife into the sink. Mom, go upstairs, please. Ethan. Now. She hesitated, frightened by the sudden authority in his voice. Then she turned and ran. Ethan walked to the front door, heart pounding. The moment he turned the knob, the door flew open, snow blasting through. Detective Keller stepped inside, her gun drawn. Ethan Cole, step away from the counter. He smiled faintly. You took your time. Chapter 17, The Search. The house was filled with police now, boots stomping, radios crackling, voices echoing. They found nothing in his room, nothing in the basement, nothing in the attic except the blackened outline where the trunk used to sit. Keller watched Ethan the entire time. He sat at the table, calm, hands folded. His mother sat beside him, weeping quietly, whispering prayers under her breath. Ethan, Keller said finally, we found the footage. He tilted his head. Footage. The video of Ryan Hale. Your voice is on it. Ethan smiled. That's impossible. She slid her phone across the table, pressing play. Ryan appeared, terrified, mumbling through tears, and then the voice came. Ethan's voice. The color drained from his mother's face. Ethan didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at the phone until the video ended. Then he said softly, that's not me. Keller leaned closer. Then who is it? Ethan looked up, eyes distant. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Chapter 18, The Woods Again. The storm grew worse as they led Ethan outside. Snow slashed through the air like shards of glass. Keller followed behind him, her gun lowered but ready. Halfway to the car, Ethan stopped walking. Do you hear that? He asked. Hear what? Keller said. The whisper. Before she could react, Ethan bolted, sprinting into the trees, vanishing into the white. Cole, stop, she shouted, chasing after him. The other officers fanned out, flashlights cutting through the storm. Ethan ran deeper and deeper until the lights disappeared behind him. His lungs burned, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't know where he was going, only that the voice was leading him. Back where it began. He reached the clearing, the same spot that had burned months ago. Snow covered the ground now, but he could still see black scars beneath. He dropped to his knees, screaming into the wind. What do you want from me? And for the first time, the whisper answered with clarity. "I am you." Chapter 19, Keller's Discovery. Keller found the clearing 10 minutes later. The snow had nearly erased his tracks. Her flashlight beam swung across the charred earth and stopped. There was a hole in the ground, half filled with snow. Inside, glimmering faintly, was something metal. She reached in and pulled it out, a melted bracelet. Her stomach turned. "Found something," she called out. But when she looked up, Ethan was gone again. She moved quickly, following the faint sound of his voice echoing through the trees. He was talking to someone, but she couldn't hear who. When she broke through the tree line, she froze. Ethan stood at the edge of the frozen river, barehanded, his breath fogging the air. He was staring into the ice as though listening to it. "Ethan," she said softly, "it's over, come back with me." He turned slowly, eyes distant, voice hollow. "She's down there." Keller stepped closer. "Who?" "Ashley," he said. "She never left." Keller's heart dropped. And then, without warning, Ethan stepped forward and slammed his fist against the ice, once, twice, until it cracked open beneath him. Chapter 20, Beneath the Ice. The world vanished in a rush of freezing black water. For a heartbeat, Ethan felt nothing, no pain, no sound, no guilt, just the cold. It was almost peaceful. He sank deeper, watching bubbles spiral past his face, the current pulling him down. In the darkness below, he thought he saw her, Ashley, drifting toward him, her hair floating like a halo. She reached out a hand. "Come home," she whispered. Ethan hesitated, then took it. Above, Keller dropped to her knees, clawing at the edge of the ice. "Ethan, grab my hand." But there was no movement, just silence and snow. When they finally pulled him from the river, his lips were blue, his eyes half open. For a moment, Keller thought it was over. But as the paramedics checked for a pulse, Ethan's mouth twitched just slightly into a faint, frozen smile. Chapter 21, The Breath Returns. The machines began to beep again. Nurses crowded around the stretcher as the paramedics shouted orders. Someone said his name, Ethan Cole, and for the first time since the river, his chest rose. Keller watched through the glass as the team worked. The boy who had walked through her town like a ghost now looked small, fragile, ordinary. But when his eyes flickered open for a second, there was no confusion in them, only awareness. A nurse touched her shoulder. "Detective, he's stable." Keller nodded slowly. "Keep him that way." Outside, the storm raged on, burying Crestwood under a white silence that felt less like snow and more like ash. Chapter 22, Room 304. Ethan woke 3 days later. The lights were too bright. The room smelled of disinfectant and metal. Bandages wrapped his hands. He turned his head. Detective Keller sat in a chair by the door, arms crossed. "Morning, Ethan." He stared at her for a long time. "Did I make it?" "You did." He smiled faintly. "That's disappointing." Keller said nothing. She spent 3 nights watching him talk in his sleep, whispering names, counting numbers, sometimes laughing. The nurses told her the temperature in his room kept dropping, no matter how high they turned up the heat. That night, Keller left him under guard. But as she walked down the hallway, the hospital lights flickered. From behind the glass, Ethan watched her go, his reflection faintly smiling even after he turned away. Chapter 23, The Hallway. The night shift nurse, Andrea, did rounds every 2 hours. Room 304 was quiet. She checked his vitals, wrote her notes, turned to leave. Then she heard it, a whisper behind her. She froze. "Mr. Cole." "Nothing." The monitor stayed steady, but the sound came again, a faint echo, like someone repeating her breath. She turned the light toward his bed. Ethan was still, eyes closed. But the mirror across from the bed showed something impossible. His reflection standing upright, watching her. Andrea blinked, the reflection gone. She stumbled out into the hallway, heart racing, telling herself it was exhaustion. Yet when she looked back, the window in his door had fogged from the inside, as if someone had pressed their mouth against it and exhaled. Chapter 24, The Visitor. Keller returned at dawn. The nurse on duty looked shaken. "He didn't sleep," Andrea whispered. "He talks to someone when he thinks no one here." "Someone?" "He says she never left the river." Keller's throat tightened. She stepped into the room. Ethan was awake, staring at the ceiling. "Who were you talking to?" she asked. He turned his head slowly. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me." Ethan smiled. "She says you're next." The lights buzzed, then went out. Keller's flashlight beam cut across the room. The bed was empty. A faint sound came from the bathroom door, like dripping water. When maintenance restored power minutes later, Ethan was back in bed, eyes closed, monitor steady. The guard swore he'd never moved. Chapter 25, The Empty Wing. By the end of the week, the hospital had lost 2 staff members to sudden transfers. The night watch refused to patrol the North Corridor. Patients whispered about seeing a boy in a hospital gown walking past their doors. Keller reviewed the security footage. Each time the camera caught a flicker of movement, the timestamp blurred, the image washed in static. She pressed her palms to her face. "It's not possible." Down the hall, Ethan sat by the window, eyes fixed on the snow-covered trees. His reflection stared back, a little older, a little darker, and whispered something only he could hear. He nodded once. In the next second, every light in the hospital flickered off, plunging the building into darkness. And in that darkness, Ethan began to smile again. Chapter 26, The Static. Detective Keller hadn't slept in 48 hours. The security feed still glitched every night at 3:17 a.m., showing bursts of static that warped into faces, sometimes hers, sometimes Ethan. The technicians blamed wiring. She blamed something colder. On the morning of the 3rd day, she brought Ethan a notebook. "Write it down," she said. "Everything you remember from the river." He looked up, eyes hollow. "You think it's me?" "I think something wants to finish what it started." He ran his fingers over the paper. "It's already finishing." That night she reviewed the new footage. Ethan sat motionless for an hour, then slowly lifted the pencil. But the camera caught something she didn't see in the room. A shadow behind him, long and thin, leaning close as if whispering into his ear. The pencil moved faster, words forming like scratches. When Keller retrieved the notebook, every page carried the same sentence, written hundreds of times. "Let me in." Chapter 27, The Snowfall. By dawn, Crestwood was sealed in by another storm. The hospital generators failed. The air turned breath fog cold even inside. Keller sat outside Ethan's room, flashlight trembling in her hand. "Power out again," said Officer Ramos, her partner. "Backup won't hold long." Through the glass, Ethan stood by the window, whispering to the whiteness outside. His breath formed tiny clouds that didn't fade, they drifted, swirling in the air like pale smoke. "Ethan," Keller said, stepping in. "Who are you talking to?" He smiled faintly. "She's waiting for you." "Who is?" "The one who pulled me out of the river. The one that didn't let me die." The floor hummed under her boots, a low vibration like distant thunder. The snow outside pressed against the glass as if alive, patterns forming shapes, eyes, mouths, and then vanishing. Keller backed away. "Ethan, you need to sit down." He didn't move. "She says if I leave, she'll stay with you instead." The lights flickered once. Every monitor flatlined for half a second, then surged back with a single word spelled across the heart rate readout. "Stay." Chapter 28, The North Wing. They evacuated the floor. Keller stayed. The rest of the hospital seemed to fold in on itself, hallways narrowing, air thickening with frost. She traced her way toward the north wing, where the oldest rooms sat abandoned, paint peeling and ceilings weeping with condensation. She heard his voice before she saw him. Not Ethan's deeper, doubled echoing. "This is where she was born," the voice said. Keller's flashlight beam landed on a door labeled "Morgue," closed. Inside, frost covered the walls like veins of glass. And there, standing in the middle of the room, was Ethan, barefoot, hospital gown torn at the sleeves. He was talking to an empty gurney. "She says you tried to stop her," he whispered. "She says you didn't let her cross." "Who, Ethan?" Keller's voice trembled. "Who are you talking about?" He turned, eyes black in the dim light. "The river doesn't let go, it trades." Chapter 29, The Trade. Keller drew closer, breath visible. The air smelled of iron and ice. "Ethan, you don't have to listen. Whatever it is, it's lying." He shook his head slowly. "She gave me breath again. She just wants to rest." The walls began to pulse, faint ripples moving through the frost as if the room itself were breathing. Keller's radio screeched, static turning into faint sobs. Then Ethan stepped aside. Behind the gurney, the frost formed a shape, a woman's face, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent cry. Keller's hand went to her weapon, but she couldn't move. The air was thick, heavy. "She wants a name," Ethan whispered. "Yours will do." The lights shattered. Wind roared through the room, papers swirling like snow. Keller reached for Ethan, grabbing his wrist, but his skin burned cold, the pulse faint. For 1 second she saw it, herself reflected in his eyes, mouth moving not by choice but command. Then everything went still. Chapter 30, The River Again. When the storm broke 2 days later, search teams found the north wing flooded waist-deep in melted frost water. The morgue was empty except for 2 sets of footprints, one adult, one small, leading to the emergency exit that opened toward the woods. Neither Keller nor Ethan was found. Weeks later, the hospital reopened. The staff avoided the wing. The new detective assigned to the case read Keller's final notes, found in her car outside the lot. The pages were water-stained, but one line was still clear. "The river takes what it's owed." That winter, the ice on the river cracked early. Locals said they saw a woman and a boy standing by the bank, silhouettes in the fog. When rescuers arrived, there were no tracks, just 2 reflections in the water, rippling as if they were still waiting to come up for air. The Hollow City. Chapter 1, The First Broadcast. It started as background noise. A muffled radio alert played between songs on a local station. A strange public safety message nobody paid much attention to. Lee Martin heard it while driving home from her night shift, a voice distorted by static, repeating something about localized contamination and avoid exposure. She laughed it off. Probably another chemical spill. The city of Rivenhurst was full of those factories along the river, coughing smoke into the sky, always followed by some vague government advisory. The streets were half empty. A fog clung to the sidewalks, thick as ash. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, then stopped abruptly. When Lee turned onto her block, her headlights caught a shape in the road, a deer, lying motionless. She braked hard. But when she got out to check, she realized the deer's eyes were open and moving. It turned its head toward her, jaw hanging oddly. Then it started to twitch, not like a wounded animal, but like something remembering how to move. She stepped back. By the time she got into her car and locked the doors, the thing was standing. And when it stumbled toward her, she finally heard the radio clearly. "Do not approach the infected. Stay indoors. The city is under quarantine." Chapter 2, The City Sleeps. By morning, Rivenhurst was quiet, too quiet. Lee watched from her apartment window as 2 men in hazmat suits sealed off the street. The news played on every channel now, words like containment, fever, behavioral collapse. The anchor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Authorities assure us this is not viral in nature. Lee turned off the TV. Her phone was full of unread messages from her friend Devin, who worked at the hospital. ER packed. People biting nurses. Don't go out. By noon, the power flickered. A loudspeaker outside announced curfew. From her balcony, she could see smoke rising near downtown. Helicopters circled the river. Something was happening beyond the skyline, something that made the air itself feel heavier. Then came the sound, distant, low, like hundreds of people shouting at once. Not words, just noise. That night, Lee barricaded her door. Not because of the government warnings, but because she could hear footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging. And then a voice, not quite human, but familiar enough to make her blood freeze. It whispered her name. Chapter 3, The Hospital. Devin hadn't answered her calls in 12 hours. Lee decided to check the hospital before the roads were fully blocked. The city felt wrong. Cars abandoned, traffic lights blinking through fog. At one intersection, she saw a police cruiser on its side, windshield cracked from the inside. The hospital parking lot was full, but no one was moving. The glass doors hung open, one cracked clean in half. The smell hit her before she stepped inside, copper and rot. The lobby was chaos, wheelchairs overturned. A trail of blood led toward the elevators. The reception computer was still logged in, displaying a screen full of patient IDs marked Code Black. She called for Devin, no answer. Then she heard something in the stairwell, a shuffle, followed by a wet gasp. She turned her flashlight toward it. A nurse stood halfway up the stairs, skin gray, eyes milky white. She moved stiffly like a puppet. Lee froze. The nurse turned her head too far, spine cracking. Her lips peeled back in a hiss. Lee bolted. She didn't look back until she reached the street, and even then, she saw dozens more figures emerging from the hospital doors. Chapter 4, Static. She reached her apartment just before dark. Sirens blared in the distance, then died out again. The emergency alert system took over every frequency. Stay inside. Do not engage infected civilians. Martial law is in effect. The fog was thicker now, carrying an odor of smoke and decay. Lee taped her windows, sealed the vents, and sat with her flashlight trembling in her hand. Her phone buzzed, a voicemail from Devin. Static filled the first few seconds, then his voice. Lee, they're not dying, even when we. The line cracked, screams echoed in the background. It spreads through blood, maybe air, More static. Don't let them in. The message cut off with a wet sound, like someone breathing too close to the mic. Lee deleted it. Her hands were shaking too much to think. Outside, something heavy slammed into her door, once, twice, then silence. She aimed the flashlight at the gap underneath. A trickle of dark liquid seeped through, thick, slow, still moving. Chapter 5, The Street Below. By dawn, the noise outside had changed. The city was alive again, but not with people. Lee looked down from her window and saw the streets crawling. Dozens of figures wandered aimlessly, swaying in the mist. Some still wore uniforms, some pajamas, one still clutching a phone to its ear. They weren't running or hunting, just existing. Every few seconds, one would stop, tilt its head, and let out a sound like a sigh. Then all the others would answer in unison, a low, mournful hum that rolled through the city like wind through broken glass. Lee packed a bag. She couldn't stay. She found her father's old revolver, a flashlight, a few cans of food. Her building had a service ladder leading to the alley. The moment she stepped outside, the air felt wrong, humid and cold at once. The city smelled like rust and something worse. Somewhere nearby, a radio crackled to life on a car hood. Rivenhurst is lost. If you're still alive, head north. Military evacuation point at Blackridge Highway. Lee looked north. The fog in that direction pulsed faintly, lit by flashes like lightning. She took a breath, gripped the gun tight, and started walking. Chapter 6, The Alleyway. The alley smelled of smoke and iron. Lee's boots crunched on broken glass as she descended the fire escape ladder, gripping her father's revolver like it could hold back the world. Shadows moved ahead of her, figures hunched and dragging limbs, unaware of her at first. Then one turned abruptly. Its head snapped unnaturally, jaw hanging loose, eyes blank and wet. Lee froze. The creature's groan rasped through the fog, low and wet. Others in the alley answered, echoing in a wave of moans. She darted forward, aiming carefully, shooting once. The revolver cracked, deafening in the narrow space. The first creature fell, but the others didn't hesitate. Their movement wasn't fast, but they were unrelenting. Every shadow became a threat, every alleyway a trap. Halfway through the street, Lee stumbled over a body not fully risen but twitching, still warm. Her stomach twisted. She didn't look back. Finally, she found a broken sedan with the doors unlocked. She climbed inside, breath coming in shallow gasps, and hid as the creatures passed by, their wet sounds bouncing off the walls like drums. The city was alive now, but not with life. It was alive with hunger. Chapter 7: The First Safe House. Lee drove slowly, hugging the abandoned streets. Smoke and ash hung in the air. Occasionally, she caught sight of figures staggering across intersections, some walking in groups, others alone. None acknowledged her. None reacted to the car's headlights. By noon, she reached a small building, an old warehouse, windows broken and boarded. She slipped inside, barricading the doors with metal beams and crates. The interior smelled like mold and rot. Piles of paper, broken furniture, and abandoned tools littered the floor. She found an office in the back with a desk and a filing cabinet. Inside, she discovered canned food, bottled water, and first aid supplies, untouched. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to sit. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her ears still strained for sound. Every groan outside the boarded windows sent her heart racing. Hours passed, and then she heard something else, faint tapping from above. Not the moans, a deliberate rhythm, footsteps packing the warehouse roof. Lee gripped the revolver again. Who's there? No answer, only the tap, tap, tap. Chapter 8: The Encounter. Night fell, thick and suffocating. The fog crept in through cracks in the boards, twisting the shadows inside the warehouse. Lee kept the flashlight trained on the roof. Then a figure dropped silently into the office. Not like the creatures outside, this one moved too fast, too fluid. "Who?" she whispered. The figure raised its hands. "Easy, don't shoot." It was a man, young, dirty, with streaks of blood on his jacket. His eyes were wide, alert, terrified. "Name's Cole," he said. "Been hiding nearby. You're lucky I didn't scream." Lee lowered the gun slightly. "Are you infected?" Cole shook his head. "No, not yet, but they're everywhere. You need to move before nightfall. They can sense you if you linger too long." Lee swallowed hard. She realized she had no choice. She had to move. Together, they began gathering supplies from the warehouse, planning a route north, toward the evacuation point mentioned on the radio. Chapter 9: The Streets of the Dead. Dawn broke, revealing Rivenhurst in all its ruined glory. The streets were littered with abandoned cars, half-burned buildings, and dozens of figures wandering aimlessly. Lee and Cole moved cautiously, hugging walls, crossing streets only when the monsters were distracted. Occasionally, one would stop, tilt its head, and emit that same low, hollow moan. The sound made Lee's skin crawl. They came across a small convenience store. The doors were barricaded with metal shelves. Lee pried a corner open. Inside, they found food, bottled water, and a few firearms left behind. Then a sudden crash, a window shattered. A figure tumbled inside, clothes tattered, limbs jerking unnaturally. Its eyes met Lee's for a heartbeat, then it lunged. Cole pushed her aside as the revolver fired. Crack after crack. The creature collapsed, twitching before going still. Lee's hands shook violently. We can't keep doing this," she whispered. Cole shook his head. We have to if we stop, Dale. A sound interrupted him. Hundreds of footsteps, wet and heavy, coming from every street in the distance. The city was moving now. The dead were marching. Chapter 10, The River Crossing. By mid-afternoon, Lee and Cole reached the river that cut through the city. Military vehicles and barricades marked the evacuation zone in the distance, smoke rising like signal fires. But the bridge was partially destroyed. The water below churned darkly, reflecting twisted, broken shapes. Lee realized with a chill, the creatures weren't afraid of the river. Some already swam, others waded, thrashing against the rails. "We'll have to go through," Cole said grimly. "It's the only way." Lee gripped her revolver and checked her backpack. They timed their crossing carefully, running across the remaining planks while the monsters on either side clawed and roared. Halfway across, one reached up, snapping a railing loose. Lee barely pulled herself forward. Cole grabbed her hand, and together they tumbled onto the far side, gasping and shaking. Behind them, the bridge collapsed completely. For a moment, Lee allowed herself hope. The evacuation point was just ahead. Then she noticed the fog shifting. Shapes moved inside it, not the slow walkers from before. Faster, hunting. The nightmare wasn't over. Chapter 11, Evacuation Point. Lee and Cole stumbled onto a dirt road that led to the military checkpoint. Sandbags and barricades lined the highway, and a few trucks were parked haphazardly, engines running. Smoke curled from the remains of a checkpoint shack. Soldiers were everywhere, but exhausted, faces pale, hands shaking, eyes darting constantly. Some held rifles, others radios, shouting orders into the wind. "Get over here," one barked. "Evacuation zone." Lee and Cole ran forward, waving their hands. They passed abandoned vehicles and bodies, both human and infected. Some soldiers ignored the figures entirely, others shot reflexively. Inside the main tent, a colonel stood over a map, markers scattered everywhere. He looked up, saw Lee and Cole, and gestured them over. "Names, age, last contact with the infected." Lee's hands trembled. I've been on my own, the city is." "We know," the colonel said. "We're lucky anyone made it this far, but stay alert. No one leaves without screening." Cole leaned close. "Screening, what's that?" The colonel didn't answer. His jaw tightened, eyes moving toward the back of the tent. Lee saw cages, shaking, moving figures inside. Not fully dead, not fully alive, prisoners of some experiment. Chapter 12, The Quarantine. Inside the quarantine tent, Lee and Cole were separated. Soldiers searched them, scanning their skin and clothes. "Exposure?" a medic asked. She had a scanner that beeped faintly at intervals. Lee held her breath. Every step she took felt heavier. The tent was crowded. People whispered quietly, some rocking, some sobbing. One man muttered a name over and over. The smell, sweat, fear, and something metallic made Lee gag. From the corner of the tent, she saw a shadow shift. Not a person, not fully. A figure hunched in a cage, pressing against the bars. Skin pale, eyes glowing faintly, saliva dripping. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Cole appeared at the next station. His face was pale. "They're experimenting," he whispered. Before Lee could ask more, the tent flaps ripped open. A scream cut through the air. A figure had broken free. Soldiers shouted, firing into the crowd. Chaos erupted. Lee ducked, covering her head. Cole grabbed her, pulling her behind crates. Outside, the fog was thicker than ever, shadows moving inside it. Something or many things were coming. Chapter 13, Into the Fog. The fence surrounding the checkpoint was breached. Soldiers tried to hold the line, but the infected surged through like a river. Lee and Cole ran into the fog, stumbling over debris. The fog seemed alive, curling around them, carrying whispers. Low moans echoed inside it, not just from the creatures, but from people too. Screams twisted and warped in the mist. Lee couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every step felt like walking on ice. She clutched the revolver, pulling the trigger on any figure that stumbled into the dim light. Cole muttered, "We need shelter, fast." They found an abandoned gas station. Shelves were overturned, a few cans of food remaining. Lee barricaded the doors. Outside, the fog shifted, shapes moving just beyond visibility. She swore she saw a hand press against the glass, long, gray, almost human. The night was endless. Every sound echoed inside the fog, footsteps, moans, and something worse, whispers. Not words, just repeated phrases calling her name. Lee, Lee. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to block it out. Cole didn't sleep. He whispered that the fog itself was alive, infected by something beyond science, something spreading faster than the streets. Chapter 14, The Bridge. By dawn, Lee and Cole decided to leave the gas station. Supplies were low, and the fog had begun to thin toward the east. The only path led to a crumbling bridge. The river below churned darkly, black and red streaked through the currents. Something floated just beneath the surface, shapes twisting, reaching upward. They ran across the bridge, careful not to look down. Every plank groaned, every shadow seemed to stretch toward them. Halfway across, Lee froze. A figure appeared on the bridge, a soldier, pale, eyes white, weapon shaking in his hands. Not fully dead, not fully alive. Its mouth moved, but no words came. Cole grabbed her arm. "Don't stop." Lee ran. Behind them, the infected surged, climbing the supports, smashing into the metal rails. The bridge trembled. By the time they reached solid ground, the sound of the fog in the river below was deafening. Chapter 15, The Village Beyond. On the far side of the river, Lee and Cole stumbled into a small village. Empty houses, smoke curling from chimneys, but no signs of life. Inside one house, they found a radio, broadcasting static and fragmented voices. Among the bursts, they heard something chilling. Infection spreading north. Evacuation failed. Repeat. Evacuation failed. Cole sank to the floor. "We're too late." Lee felt the weight of it, the city, the checkpoint, the fog, the river, all pointing toward the same truth. The infection was unstoppable. Outside, a shadow moved. Not one creature, but dozens emerging from the mist. Their groans mixed with human screams. Lee raised the revolver and Cole picked up a broken pipe. They had no choice. And in the distance, the fog shifted, glowing faintly red. The infection was not just spreading, it was evolving. Lee swallowed hard. Survival meant moving forward into the heart of horror itself. Chapter 16, The Survivor Camp. Lee and Cole moved cautiously through the village. Smoke rose from chimneys, but there were no signs of people moving outside. Every house they passed had doors ajar or smashed windows. The air smelled of decay, soot, and something faintly metallic. They followed the faint sound of movement to a barn at the village's edge. Inside, a small survivor camp had been set up. Tarps, makeshift beds, and a few weary figures huddled together. One man approached, holding a rifle but speaking quietly. "Who are you? Infected?" Lee shook her head. "No, we just were trying to survive." A woman stepped forward, eyes sharp. "Everyone who's clean comes in, but we don't trust anyone for long. You're lucky the fog hasn't reached here yet." Cole whispered to Lee, "Fog. It's spreading faster than anything else. That's why the bridge, why everything outside is chaos." Inside the barn, Lee noticed strange markings on the walls, scratched symbols, numbers, and warnings. One read, "Do not sleep after dusk." Another, "They can hear you breathe." It became clear. The survivors were organized but terrified. They had seen what the fog could do. They had learned the hard way that being alive didn't mean being safe. Chapter 17, The Fog Descends. That night, the fog rolled into the village. It pressed against the barn walls like a living thing, whispering faintly, almost like hundreds of voices repeating the same name. Lee stayed awake, listening. Every few minutes she heard a wet scraping sound on the barn walls. Something moved outside, slow, deliberate, unhurried, yet fully aware. The survivors reinforced doors and windows, but the fog seemed to seep in regardless. The sound intensified. Groans, whimpers, the wet shuffle of claws or fingers on wood. Cole whispered to Lee, "They're testing us. They know we're here." A scream cut through the night. One of the guards had stepped outside, probably to investigate. Whatever was in the fog got him, dragged him into the darkness in a wet, muffled struggle. The barn fell silent. Then came the whispers again, louder, as if circling them inside. Lee realized with a sinking horror that the fog didn't just contain the infected. It was the infection, and it was hunting them. Chapter 18, The Escape Plan. Morning came gray and heavy. The fog had receded slightly, but the memory of the previous night lingered. Many of the survivors were too shaken to move. Lee and Cole checked the supplies and discovered a map of the region. One route led northeast, toward mountains that could provide shelter and higher ground. The fog seemed less dense there. "We have to go," Lee said. "If we stay, we're dead." The camp leaders agreed reluctantly. They had no choice. Only a small group could move quickly. Everyone else would likely be trapped. They packed weapons, food, and water. Lee checked the revolver, counting bullets carefully. Every step would matter. Every sound could draw the fog. As they left, Lee noticed the abandoned houses. Figures watched them from broken windows, some fully risen, some partially, eyes glinting white in the fog. The world beyond the village was no longer a city. It was a hunting ground. Chapter 19, The First Crossing. The survivors reached a narrow path that led to the base of the mountains. A river cut across their path, swollen with runoff from the storm. The bridge was gone, destroyed by the previous wave of chaos. Cole found a canoe, damaged but usable. "We can get across, but quietly. The fog is sensitive to sound." Lee took the lead. The river's current tugged at the canoe, making it nearly impossible to control. Every splash sounded like a gunshot to her ears. Halfway across, a figure appeared on the opposite bank, wet, shuffling gray. The fog behind it curled forward like a wave. Lee held her breath. The figure didn't move aggressively at first, but then it lifted a hand, clawed, pale, and pointed at them. The survivors paddled frantically. Behind them, the fog surged, rushing over the riverbanks like liquid. It hissed, whispered, screamed. They made it across, soaked and exhausted but alive. For the first time, Lee realized survival was not about fighting. It was about outrunning the infection. Chapter 20, The Mountains Ahead. The mountains loomed, jagged and foreboding. The survivors paused at the tree line, catching their breath. The fog was behind them now, creeping steadily, swallowing the village and river path whole. Occasionally, shapes appeared inside it, moving faster than humans should. They seemed aware, intelligent, hunting. Lee looked at Cole. "Do you think we'll make it?" He didn't answer. He was watching the fog, calculating, waiting. The survivors formed a line and began the ascent. Every step was tense. Branches snapped underfoot. Every noise could be fatal. Above, the sky was gray, heavy with the promise of rain. The wind carried faint groans and whispers. Lee's heart pounded. She realized the world had ended not with a bang, but with the slow, unrelenting spread of something smarter than herself. The mountains might offer safety, or they might simply delay the inevitable. And far behind them, the fog pulsed, alive, hungry, waiting. Chapter 21, The High Ground. The mountains were steeper than they imagined. Rocks shifted under their boots, roots tangled their feet, and the air grew thinner with every step. The fog was slower here, creeping along the valleys rather than climbing the slopes, but it had a presence. Lee felt it in her chest, a pressure, almost alive. Cole kept checking the tree line behind them. They're adapting. The slower ones their bait, the faster ones they're learning. Lee shivered. Learning what? Us, he said. Our movement, our patterns, if they ever surround a camp, his voice trailed off. They paused on a ridge. Below, the fog had swallowed the river path completely. Shapes swam in the mist, twisting unnaturally. Some moved on all fours, others stood upright, stalking like predators. Lee realized something terrifying. They weren't just walking corpses. They were hunting, thinking, testing, pushing survivors toward mistakes. Chapter 22, The Stranger. As night fell, Lee and Cole spotted a flicker of light through the trees. A small fire, another survivor. They approached cautiously. A man emerged, young, dirty, clutching a rifle and a lantern. "Who are you?" Cole demanded. The man's eyes darted nervously. "I've been surviving alone. I can help you if you don't mind my company." Lee studied him. He smelled of smoke and sweat like a predator in human skin. Still, they needed allies. "Name?" Lee asked. "Elias." For a while, they shared the fire, rationing food. Elias spoke of another survivor enclave farther north, fortified, hidden with supplies. But he warned, the fog doesn't just consume the weak, it tests the strong. Some didn't come back the same. Lee didn't ask what he meant. She already sensed it. The fog warped minds, infected not just bodies but thoughts. Chapter 23, The First Night Attack. The group camped in a small grove. Lee kept watch while Cole and Elias rested. The night was silent at first, almost peaceful. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, like leaves rustling, then louder, voices calling names, commands, pleas, threats. Lee gripped her revolver, trying to ignore it. Then a shadow moved in the corner of her eye, not human, not fully dead, faster than any infected they'd seen before. She fired, the shot cracking the night, but it was only a distraction. The fog began to swirl violently around the camp. Shapes emerged, dozens of them, faster, smarter, coordinated. Cole and Elias jumped to their feet. "Run!" Cole yelled. They fled into the trees. The forest became a maze of branches and roots. The fog pressed in, whispering, slithering like liquid. Lee realized something horrifying. The infected weren't just hunting bodies anymore. They were hunting minds, and the fog was their instrument. Chapter 24, The Broken Village. Dawn revealed the aftermath. Their small camp was destroyed, trees snapped, ground churned, leaves coated with blood and ash. The survivors from the night before, gone, not dead in place, vanished as if absorbed into the fog. Lee and Cole pressed on, moving cautiously. The fog thinned in the morning light, revealing an abandoned village. Houses burned, doors hanging open, but a small well remained intact. Cole knelt to check the water. Lee scanned the surroundings. Then she noticed something. Shadows moved unnaturally in the upper windows. Figures paused, then twitched toward her. "They're watching," she whispered. The realization hit her. Anywhere humans had lived, the infection had already been. Buildings weren't safe, nothing was safe. And somewhere in the village, she could hear the wet, dragging sounds of creatures moving beneath the floors. Chapter 25, The First True Hunt. By afternoon, Lee, Cole, and Elias approached a ridge overlooking the valley below. They spotted movement, dozens of infected, faster, stronger, and strangely coordinated. They weren't stumbling mindlessly. They were organized, swarming like predators around an unseen target. Elias whispered, "This isn't natural. Something's guiding them." Lee shivered. The fog, it's not just the infection, it's controlling them. The group tried to sneak along the ridge, but the wind shifted. The fog rose from the valley like smoke from a furnace, curling, stretching, alive. Shapes surged forward, faster than they could react. Lee aimed, shooting anything that moved, but for every one they struck down, two more appeared. Cole grabbed her arm. "We have to move now." They ran down a side path, branches clawing at their faces. Behind them, the fog consumed the ridge. Groans, whispers, and wet thuds filled the air. By nightfall, they reached another mountain pass, exhausted and bleeding. Lee realized the horrifying truth. This apocalypse wasn't just about survival. It was about being hunted by a force that adapted, learned, and waited, always just out of reach, and far smarter than anything they'd faced so far. Chapter 26, The Valley of Silence. Lee, Cole, and Elias pressed into a steep valley, the fog far below now stretching across the mountains like a living carpet. It wasn't just mist anymore. It moved with purpose. Groans echoed through the treetops as twisted shapes emerged, packing in the fog like a hunting pack. "Look at them," Elias whispered, voice shaking. "They're organized." Lee peered through the binoculars she'd salvaged. Hundreds, maybe thousands of infected, moving in formation, surrounding villages, forests, and roads. Something about their movement was chilling, coordinated, almost intelligent. "Whatever did this," Cole said, "it's learning. Every step we take, it's studying us. It's adapting." They paused at a crumbling cabin on the ridge. It provided temporary shelter, but Lee noticed strange scratches along the walls. Symbols, numbers, and words etched into wood like warnings. "They know your fear, they use it." The three survivors shared the small cabin, keeping watch in shifts. The fog outside hissed and swirled, whispering names. Each time Lee closed her eyes, the voices haunted her. "Lee, run, we see you." By nightfall, the fog crept closer, pressing at the base of the cabin. The groans of the infected were distant but growing louder. Chapter 27, The Evolved Ones. Morning revealed horrifying signs. Tracks led into the valley, not just human or animal, but large, uneven shapes. Flesh and shadow combined. These creatures were faster, smarter, coordinated. Elias knelt to inspect a print. These, they're different. Bigger, stronger, evolved. Lee felt bile rise in her throat. Evolved how? Smarter. Yes, smarter, they think now. They hunt in patterns. They avoid traps. As they descended into the valley, they saw them. The evolved infected, moving in almost predatory formation. Their heads tilted unnaturally, limbs contorting as if experimenting with movement. Every few seconds, one would pause and glance directly at the survivors. Lee's stomach knotted. "They can see us," she whispered. "More than that," Cole said. "They're anticipating us." The valley became a gauntlet. Every step was carefully measured. Every sound drew attention. Shadows flickered. Shapes lunged from trees and underbrush. Survival was no longer about running. It was about outthinking creatures that learned as quickly as humans did. Chapter 28, The Survivor's Choice. The trio reached an abandoned farm on the far side of the valley. They found other survivors hiding inside. Families, lone hunters, a few soldiers. Exhaustion, fear, and desperation painted every face. Lee realized the moral dilemma. There were limited supplies. Not everyone could survive the journey north. They would have to choose who to bring forward. Elias, nervous and quiet, whispered, "We can't save everyone. If we linger, we all die." Lee looked at Cole. "We have to move now, tonight. Some of these people won't make it, but we can't carry them all." The decision tore at them. Families begged to be saved. Soldiers argued. A small child cried for its mother. Lee and Cole had to decide quickly. They prioritized those who could move fastest, leaving behind those too weak to escape the evolved infection and fog. As they left the farm, the fog rolled in, carrying whispers, moans, and the smell of blood. Lee's heart hammered. She realized this apocalypse demanded both survival and sacrifice, and sometimes one came at the cost of the other. Chapter 29, The Heart of the Fog. The survivors pressed forward into the dense fog. Visibility dropped to a few feet. Groans surrounded them from all directions. The evolved infected tested their path, using the terrain, splitting to flank, isolating stragglers. Lee's flashlight flickered. A shadow moved ahead, larger than human, limbs twisting unnaturally. It lunged at the group. Cole and Lee fought, shooting and striking as they ran. The evolved infected were almost intelligent. avoiding every trap, predicting movements, adapting. The fog itself seemed alive. Voices whispered threats, names, commands. Lee realized it wasn't just the infected hunting them. The fog was a weapon, a predator in its own right, amplifying fear, confusion, and despair. By nightfall, only a handful of survivors remained. Exhausted, bleeding, and terrified, Lee looked at the valley behind them. The fog had consumed everything: farms, villages, the river crossing. "It's endless," she said. "No," Cole replied grimly. "It's patient." Chapter 30, The Last Ascent. The survivors reached the final ridge before the supposed safe zone, a plateau high above the fog. They could see military helicopters in the distance, faint signals of hope. But the evolved infected weren't far behind. They had learned to climb. Shadows shifted along the slopes. Lee realized the truth. Survival might never mean safety. The infection adapted faster than humanity could run. They climbed desperately, every step slipping on mud and rocks. A scream rang out. Elia's overtaken. Lee froze, but Cole dragged her forward. The plateau was close, but the fog surged upward like a tide. Lee and Cole reached the top, collapsing onto the rocky ground. Helicopter blades cut through the mist, searchlights piercing the fog. "Come on," a voice shouted from above. Lee looked back. The valley below was alive with movement, the evolved infected writhing, climbing, pushing upward. They were surrounded, trapped between earth and sky. Cole grabbed her hand. "Jump," he shouted. Together they leapt toward the helicopter, the fog curling around them like hands. Lee felt a cold pressure, whispered words in her ear. "We see you, we always see you." The helicopter lifted off. Lee clutched the railing, exhausted and shaking. Below, the valley disappeared into the fog. The world they had known was gone. And high above, she realized a terrible truth. Humanity had not won. They had survived for now. But the infection, the fog, and the evolved ones would wait, patient, watching, learning. As the helicopter flew north, Lee closed her eyes. She understood the final horror. The apocalypse wasn't ending. It was only beginning.